So, what were the circumstances that brought about the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia of 1787? As usual, there was a political and social crisis that took place called Shays' Rebellion and the following turmoil, which led those like Alexander Hamilton to call for a convention in Annapolis. Then there is the Philadelphia Convention, the actual Constitution Convention, and finally, the battle for ratification. Shays' Rebellion came about as a result of a severe economic depression that hurt farmers in western Massachusetts. What happened is that merchants started demanding hard currency to pay foreign creditors. That means coinage. And farmers were constantly short of hard currency. They needed cash, and they needed to pay in cash. And the merchants were not having any of that. And so there was a petition arising asking for lower taxes, paper money, and more than anything, judicial reform, because it was in the courts that the foreclosures took place and the taxes were enforced and liens were put. And this led to the rebellion because they felt that the courts were not serving the needs of the lower classes. Captain Daniel Shays, a veteran of the Revolution and Bunker Hill, led an attack on the Court of Common Pleas in Massachusetts. And this was a real big wake-up call to the rest of the country, because this meant that now they were using revolutionary tactics yet again. Counties now began to hold conventions, and there were common complaints in all of them. The governor's making too much money. The taxes are too high. The state assembly that makes the laws and levies the taxes is too arrogant, too aristocratic. It's starting to sound a great deal like the Revolution, and they are adopting Revolutionary War tactics. This is an etching of Captain Daniel Shays, who was leading the rebellion in Massachusetts. Shays' Rebellion and the county conventions then gives Alexander Hamilton the opportunity to strike. He calls for a convention at Annapolis, Maryland, the capital of Maryland, and there they pass a resolution calling for the government, the Continental Congress, to call a constitutional convention. Hamilton's view is this: he wants to see a balanced government. He wants the masses, the lower classes, to have their democracy. There's no doubt about it. But that democracy needs to be checked, or more importantly, tamed by the aristocracy. And they would do this through separation of powers in the government and checks and balances, in which each power of the government would serve as a check and a balance on the other power of the government. And thus, the Continental Congress authorizes a constitutional convention to be held in Philadelphia under the guidance of 39 men considered to be the elites in American society. The idea of the Philadelphia Convention was to revise the Articles. That's what they were there to do. They were there to revise the Articles of Confederation. But when they get there and they take a look at the situation, they decide on two things. One, they are going to adopt the rule of secrecy. They are not going to let any leakage get out to the press. That way, people would be able and free to speak their minds and their hearts truthfully. Secondly, they decide enough of the Articles. They scrap them all together. They're going to start fresh and write a new Constitution. And thus the Constitutional Convention begins under a cloud of secrecy, which made many people in the United States a little bit uneasy. Secrecy was something that the aristocracy did. It was not something that democracies did. And so the debate begins. First, they elect George Washington as president of the Constitutional Convention. He will set the rules, and he will have make sure that the debates are moved along properly. First up is Edmund Randolph of Virginia, who offers what is known as the Virginia Plan. The Virginia Plan essentially starts to lay the foundation for what is now the federal government. First, it removes the state legislatures, both structurally and in terms of powers, from any place of the new continental arrangement. It also says that the national legislature should consist of two branches, and that the people of each state should elect the first branch of the legislature, and that the second branch should be elected by the first branch of the legislature. This sounds very aristocratic, almost like a House of Commons, House of Lords thing. Not completely, but very much. It would handle affairs above and beyond the capacity of the states and nullify laws of states when necessary. It would also elect a national executive. The country would do that. They would create a national judiciary. There's your separation of powers. And it would also create a council of revision that would revise the constitutional arrangement when necessary. There is a great deal of debate. The Virginia Plan comes from a large state, Virginia, and this is obviously very conducive to the power of a large state. To further bolster the Virginia Plan, James Madison, who is writing copious notes during this convention, states very clearly that a large heterogeneous nation, rather than a small homogeneous nation, best serves the people. That the nation needs to be diverse as much as possible. Well, as I said, Virginia's plan is for the large states. New Jersey is not a large state, and William Paterson of New Jersey offers what is called the New Jersey Plan. Here, he states that there should be a one-house legislature, unicameral, in which all the states would have an equal number of votes, that Congress would be given the power to tax and regulate trade. This is simply a restatement of the Articles with a few changes, a few small flourishes to it. And it is very quickly rejected, but not as a whole, because there are parts of the New Jersey Plan that will be made in and fused in with the Virginia Plan, especially the power of Congress to tax, the power of Congress to regulate trade, and the primacy of national law, which will soon become known as federal law. Then Alexander Hamilton, being Alexander Hamilton, steps up and says that his plan would have one house of the legislature serve for life. That would be like the House of Lords. And that there would be a strong executive, a president, who would also serve for life. This is very aristocratic. This is very pro-aristocratic. And many in the country said this is not good. We do not have people that serve for life. That is not acceptable in a democracy. There will be some offices that should be lifetime, but for the most part, people should be elected to their offices. See, Alexander Hamilton, if he had had his way, would have had a king. So with small states like New Jersey and Rhode Island pushing back against the large states,
and so
such
39
as New York
delegates
and Virginia,
now voted to approve
it
and
comes
send
to
this
a
new
middling
constitution
state, to the states,
a medium-sized
ratification.
state, Connecticut, to offer the compromise.
This is how the Constitution
This is known
would
as the
break down.
Connecticut
You have a
Compromise,
legislative
or
branch
the Great
consisting of two
Compromise.
houses.
It's offered
The
by
lower
Roger
house, the House
Sherman
of Representatives
of Connecticut.
Members would serve
He says,
2-year
okay,
terms.
we have two plans.
And all would
Virginia
be
plan, New
elected
Jersey
every
plan.
2
Let's
years. So
fuse
every
these
2 years,
together
the
now.
entire House comes up
We'll
for
create an upper
re-election.
house, a Senate. That'll represent
The upper house,
states.
called the Senate,
Members
that's where
would
the
serve
small
6-year
states can
terms.
still have power.
And only 1/3
And it has
would
equal
be elected
representation,
every 2 years.
which will be two
so if you
senators
have
from each state.
100 senators, then there'll
You
be a
have
lower
33
house
elected
called the House of
in 2 years.
Representatives.
Then
this
2
will
years later,
represent the people.
another
This would
33
be the
would be
repository of
elected, and then
democracy.
2 years after that,
And its representation
another 33 would be
is
elected,
based on the
34 in this
population,
case.
that is counting heads.
And
then
then
you
all
have
of
an
a sudden,
executive
there's a
branch.
new
This would be
controversy
the
over
president.
this.
He would serve
How
a
are you going to
4-year
count
term.
the
He
population?
would be given broad powers, especially
The northern
in regards
states
to
say
foreign policy.
you should count
and
every
would be
free
commander-in-chief
person
of the
in a
nation's
state.
armed forces.
The southern states say no,
and
we
then you
should
have the
count
judicial
every
branch,
person,
almost an
in a
afterthought
state,
for a while,
which means
the judicial
slaves
branch
too.
would establish
The
a
North
Supreme
says, well, wait a
Court
minute, you don't
and
think that slaves
13
are persons,
circuit courts.
but now that
One,
you want
obviously,
representation,
for each
you
state.
want to count them.
At the
This
end of the
threatens
convention,
to divide
it
the
is
convention
left to
completely,
the
and
elderly
so they
Benjamin
go into the
Franklin
back
to
room
kind
and
of
start
sum up
working out a
everything.
deal. And what
Franklin's
they come
very
up with is
old and
called the
infirm,
three,
and he's not
fifths
able to actually stand
compromise.
up and deliver the speech
The
himself.
three-fifths
So he
compromise
has one of his
states very
assistants
clearly
do it for him.
that
One of
for
his fellow
population
delegates, I should
purposes,
say.
you will count
And in
every
which he says, gentlemen,
person
what we have
in
done
the state,
is
every
great.
free person's
And many
head.
will look back
and
on
then
this
you will
time
count
and say
3
that
out
we
of
did
every
well
5
here.
other persons. That
And then he
means
sits
slaves.
down and he points to the chair
And that
that
is for the
Washington
purposes
sits
of
in.
representation.
On the back of the chair
so
was a
if
sun
a
on the horizon.
state such as South Carolina,
And Franklin
which has
says to
a
his
population
friend,
of
he says, all this
50,000
time,
free
I couldn't
persons
tell whether that was
and
a rising
50,000
sun
slaves,
or a setting sun.
you would count
now in my
all
last years of life,
50,000 free
I look
persons,
at what we've done
and
today,
you
and
would
I
count
can say
only
with great
30,000
confidence
of the
that it
slaves
is
for
indeed
population.
a
So you would
rising
base
sun.
representation on 80,000 people. I hope that makes sense to you. This saves the Constitutional Convention.
The Constitutional Convention
There are other
has
items
sent
of
out
debate as well,
the Constitution,
including the length of terms
does
for
not make it the law of the
legislators
land
and the
yet.
president.
in order for
power
the
of Congress
Constitution
to regulate
become
commerce.
law, the states
And
need to
they say,
ratify
well, what about
it. That is
international
3/4 of
slavery?
the states.
They
And
say, listen,
right
we
away,
think that
there is
slavery is going to
opposition to
eventually
this
die
new
off,
Constitution.
so we're going to punt.
They were either opposed
We're
to
going
or
to
they
have a
distrusted
20-year
the
ban
Constitution.
on congressional action
Samuel
regarding
Adams,
slaves. Congress can
the
take no
old
slave
revolutionary
action
in
for 20
Massachusetts,
years.
was very
And that
distrusting,
means
as was John
simply
Hancock.
that the founding
Patrick Henry of
fathers,
Virginia said,
imperfect
"I
human
smell a
beings
rat."
that they were,
in Philadelphia,
did
Thomas
not want
Paine
to address
said,
that issue
"This
then
is
and
definitely
there,
not
and would leave it to another
conducive to the
generation."
rights of our
Thinking
fellow human beings."
Wrongly, but thinking
Many of the
nonetheless that there would be
anti-federalists
no
had their
slavery to
support
worry
in the
about
country
in 20
and
years,
in the
that it would
back
die
country.
off.
But they were relatively
wrong about
disorganized
that. They
in
were
their
very wrong
opposition,
about
and
it.
they were behind the Federalists who supported the Constitution because they started their opposition later than the Federalists did. The Federalists had their support in the cities, and in the cities were where most of the major newspapers are located. They're very well organized, and they are led by some of the shining stars of American intellectual life, Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay, who then write a series of articles published in the newspaper under the pseudonym Publius. It helps explain the new government to the people and why the founders of the nation did what they did. This becomes known as the Federalist Papers, the great explanation for the Constitution to the American people. This map indicates the areas of support for ratification and against ratification, and so. Could have gone either way. When the conventions begin, 9 of the 13 states are needed for ratification, but not just any 9. New York and Virginia are targeted as linchpins in the ratification process. If they don't ratify, it really would not make the government very legitimate. Pennsylvania wanted to be the first to ratify, but Delaware beat them to the punch by 5 days on December the 7th, 1787. December the 7th. Interesting day, I would say. Pennsylvania then follows and becomes the second state on December the 12th. New Jersey, December the 18th. Georgia, January the 2nd. Connecticut, January the 9th. Massachusetts, an important state, ratifies the Constitution on February the 7th, despite Adams and Hancock's original opposition. They are assured of some conditions for their ratification. Maryland on April the 28th, South Carolina on May 23rd, and New Hampshire becomes the 9th state on June 21st, and that means that the Constitution is ratified. However, that does not mean that the Constitution is really in effect, because Virginia and New York are still out there. Why did Samuel Adams and John Hancock support ratification? Because they were assured of a Bill of Rights. They kept saying that a Bill of Rights needs to be in this Constitution, to which Hamilton and Madison said, well, wait a minute, it's implied in there. They say, no, we want it spelled out. Rhode Island decides, instead of having a convention to ratify the Constitution, they just simply put it to a vote. And most of the people vote against it in 1788. And so Rhode Island would not ratify the Constitution until 1790. And then under duress. And there is the document that is sent to the states for ratification and then is ratified with its famous preamble, "We the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union." This document would be noted for its appeal to the people, its foundation on the people, not the elites, not the aristocracy, not the lower classes, the people. That really makes this Constitution very strong. We, the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty on ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.